Goeiedag, mijn naam is Evan, ik ben immigratieprocureur hier in Amerika, en ik wil jou helpen om immigratiewet te verstaan. Now, this video is a follow-up to the last one I made, but first, forgive me again, they're working in my house, there's a lot of noise going on, and I think they turned off the air conditioning because I'm sweating through my soul, which is why I have this ridiculous comb-over going on, and I'm literally just bleeding through my clothing. So forgive that, but I wanted to make this video because there were a lot of comments on the last one. Colonel Wyatt commented, a bunch of you commented, with this concept of persecution. And I want to be clear about this because, first, this is just my opinion. It is not legal advice. I'm merely telling you my opinion based on what I know as an immigration attorney, what I know about the law, because let's be clear, even though this refugee program is not an immigration program, it does fall under immigration law with USCIS, the State Department, Department of Justice, and all of the same terminology used for asylum programs here in the United States are the same terminology, nomenclature, definitions, and standards that are applied to the refugee program. So I want to discuss today the three elements of proving persecution, what persecution is, and why I continue to tell you that, in my opinion, if you are currently here in the United States, you cannot go back to South Africa and be considered for the refugee program, or at least be accepted into the refugee program based on what we know about these programs in the past and the terminology and definitions, okay? And again, it's just my opinion. Y'all, you're gonna have to make your own decisions. You're gonna have to decide that for yourself. What do you think is best for you? All I can do is say that I'm here to help, and I'm doing the best that I can based on what I know, and based off of all the asylum cases that I've done in the past, which uses the same law that is applicable to refugees. So for those of you here on H visas, on these agricultural visas, who are saying, can I apply for the refugee program? Can I go back to South Africa and apply for the refugee program? Let's be clear about one thing. By U.S. law, and there's no black and white about this, by U.S. law, you cannot be a refugee if you're currently in the United States. That's the way it is. You can get it right off of USCIS. The reason for that is if your reason for staying here indefinitely is because you have a well-founded fear of future persecution in your home country, there is an opportunity available to you. That is asylum. The government doesn't care that asylum has an absurdly high denial rate. That's not their problem. They're only concerned that you have that opportunity available to you, so why would you go back to your home country if you genuinely fear persecution? And that's what this is going to come down to, what that term persecution is, and why I think it is a kill shot for you to return to South Africa. I've said if you're here and your family's in South Africa going through the refugee program, let them go through it. You remain here on your visa. If your visa is going to expire, you can apply for asylum. There's nothing wrong with that. You have a well-founded fear of future persecution. Once you file for asylum, you can remain. Now remember, this is just for this strategy of people who have family, direct family, immediate family in the refugee program. You can remain, you can work after your 6-month waiting period is over for your EAD, your employment authorization document, and once your family comes over as refugees, you can adjust your status through them being refugees here, right? So for you to go back, I think is silly based on what I'm about to say. But again, you're going to have to make your own decisions because we fully know that most, if not all, asylum claims are going to be denied. It's the reality of how difficult the program is. Every Afrikaner I've already spoken to who has not had counsel and has their interviews has been denied asylum and is now in removal proceedings and again fighting through now the immigration court. So let's just be clear about that. This would just be a way to stay while you're waiting for your family to come over as refugees and adjust status through them. And there's nothing wrong with that because you do have a genuine fear and you are applying for asylum. And God forbid if something happened to them, you could follow through with your asylum claim. So that being said, but the point of persecution, and Colonel Wyatt said this, and he's right. And one of the things that I do or have done is I've made these videos so many times and said the same thing over and over again that sometimes I forget the nuances and the details for possibly new viewers. I say, and I'm going to cite case law today to show you this, that persecution is more than mere discrimination and harassment. It's extreme levels of conduct. So extreme that I say the only real examples of persecution that have won in asylum claims, and I know we're talking differences here, we're talking about refugee programs, but just so you understand the difference, that threats to life and liberty are really the only things that have ever crossed that threshold into the government saying, yes, this is really persecution. But yes, other things do qualify, especially when looked at in the aggregate. We'll talk about that in a second. And I forgot to mention that because I always try and put the bar so high so we don't miss anything. So if you can prove that, hey, I have a fear of being here because the EFF says they want to shoot me and kill me. That's pretty extreme. That goes above and beyond mere discrimination or harassment. But let's look at some case law. And then when you understand why persecution is so high of a level that you going back would undermine your claim or shoot yourself in the foot. So, straight from U.S. case law, which, by the way, USCIS uses to educate and train their refugee officers, their asylum officers, to set their standards, set their protocols. They take this from U.S. law and U.S. case law. So, let's see what the courts have to say. Persecution is more than mere discrimination or harassment. Persecution requires an extreme level of conduct. Various forms of physical violence, including rape, torture, assault, and beatings, amount to persecution. Now, the reason that I don't always mention this is because, as I've told you, and I've said in other videos where I've read you BIA decisions, one beating, two beatings, one assault, things like that, sometimes the government has said that's not enough. So when I put the bar so high as life for liberty, I do that for a reason. But again, look at the next court decision. It said a court, or in this case the government, you can interchange those, may consider acts in the aggregate and find they rise to the level of persecution in some cases. So, if there have been repeated acts of physical violence inside Africa against Afrikaners, you could say, look, people are getting beat up every day. People are getting killed every day. People are getting assaulted or raped, God forbid, every day. That in the aggregate, ongoing things that aren't necessarily threats to life per se, but are violent, may amount to persecution. So keep that in mind. Now, the Seventh Circuit, which is, if you're not familiar with the U.S. legal system, you have the Supreme Court, you have the federal circuit courts, federal district courts, state courts. So the level just under the Supreme Court actually said something interesting. This is what I want you to think about. The Seventh Circuit actually distinguished between harassment and persecution as being the difference between, quote, the nasty and the barbaric, or alternatively, between wishing you were living in another country and being so desperate that you flee without any assurance of being given refuge in any other country. So you see the difference there? They're saying that discrimination is, I wish I lived somewhere else. Man, this sucks, but I wish I lived somewhere else. Persecution is, I don't care, I'm leaving right now. I'm going to whatever country I can. I don't even care if they have relief. I just need to get out of here because I fear for my life, or I fear getting repeatedly beaten or assaulted or raped or tortured or all of this. So you see the difference? Now, in that first situation, I really wish I lived somewhere else. I could see you going back to your home country to settle your affairs, to see if there's another way out and get legal status in the United States. It seems kind of, yeah, this is a hassle, but I can do it. That's not persecution. Persecution is, I've got to get out of here no matter what. I've got to go. I've got to flee. I got to get, I don't care what it takes. I'm just leaving. I got to get out of here. I can no longer stay here because of the persecution, the extreme levels of conduct. So my point is, if you go back to South Africa, yes, I understand you have families there. Yes, I understand all these different things going on. I get it. I would have a hard time leaving my family in a place where a major political party is chanting, kill my ethnic group, right? But if you go back, you are going to have a hard time explaining to that USCIS refugee officer that you have a genuine, well-founded fear of future persecution. I think you'd be able to prove you have a well-founded fear of discrimination, harassment, because you came back. But if persecution is death, rapes, assault, torture, beatings, imprisonment, do people go back to that? Would someone go back, because Nazi Germany keeps being brought up, would a Jewish person go back to Nazi Germany? Right? If they were in the United States, I'm like, asylum doesn't seem like it's such a good option, but Germany's opening a program, or the U.S. opening a program in Germany. If I go back to Germany, I could apply and then come back. Would you do that? Because that's persecution, right? Where these serious threats to physical health, to bodily harm, to life and limb, to freedom, that's persecution. So if you go back while an opportunity is available to you here, no matter how difficult that opportunity is, I personally believe you shoot yourself in the foot in front of that refugee officer. From everything I've read from USCIS training manuals, which are public, you can go find them, to all of the court cases that I've dealt with concerning what persecution is and how the State Department and Justice Department and DHS all define persecution, and from all the cases that I've dealt with, if you go back, it is always the kill shot. Now, the situation is different because it's an in-country refugee program, and this is where the interviews and everything are being done. But if you go back, if I was your refugee officer, I personally would deny it. because you came back. I've got to get out of here or I will be killed, I will be raped, I will be tortured, I will be smitten, I will be imprisoned, all of these sorts of things. I would deny it. And that's a serious problem. That's what we have to come to terms with. And even though this program is different in that it's in country and all of that, it still uses the same standards. Some was saying, well, this program's different. No, not in terms of what definitions it uses and the law. BEE, 140 discriminatory race laws, is not the level of persecution by themselves. I'm sorry to say that. You could argue with me till you're blue in the face and pass out. If you just argued economics, by the way, go ask people who've been to interviews. The comments have been made here that they've been steered away from economic things. Or ask, is there anything else? Because that's not enough. The courts here, we have never believed, the United States has never accepted economic asylees or economic refugees. 100%. Gone. Immediately thrown out. All of the courts, all of the decisions, and all of the law has said that the economic persecution has to be so extreme that you simply cannot live. Not that you'd have to get a job you don't like, but you cannot live. So it's really that high of a burden. So this program isn't unique in the law that it's using to determine what persecution is. So again, I'm not saying this to upset people or to deter people. You have to make that decision if you want to go back to South Africa. If you're here in the United States, you cannot be a refugee. We're still waiting to hear from the Afrikaners group about people outside of South Africa, but not in the United States, whether or not they can apply for the refugee program. Once I get the information, I'll give it out to you. But as far as in the United States, you cannot be a refugee. So you either have to file for asylum, or you go back to South Africa, and then you're going to have to explain to that refugee officer why your fear of persecution was not so great that you were able to come back to the country where you fear experiencing this persecution. Why would you go to the place where you fear it happening? That's just common sense. And every immigration attorney I've talked to, because this is unique to us, we don't deal with refugees. This isn't something we do, right? We deal with asylees. But every immigration attorney I've talked to, the analogies and the similarities using the same law and program, it's analogous. So why would you go back? It would undermine your claim. But again, if anyone has done this and has information, post it here. Let's know. If I'm wrong, I need to know, not from opinions, but from someone, so we could say, no, go back, drop your asylum claims, go back right now, and put in for the refugee program, because it's just, the opportunity is just so much easier, a better chance of being able to escape persecution. So just wanted to clear that up, put that out there. Please remember to like, subscribe, share, and I'll see you for the next video.